Now, I'd have to say one of the most impressive things about Season 1 of The Mandalorian is just how well received it was by virtually everyone. From fans to critics to casual viewers, this show seemed to be enjoyed by nearly everybody. And no, not literally everyone, but especially when compared to the divisive sequels, this was something truly embraced by the whole fandom and beyond. And recently, Jon Favreau, he's of course the writer and showrunner of The Mandalorian, gave some thoughts in an interview about just what the key to the show's success likely was. And so he said, "We always knew, and this is something I learned from over at Marvel and working with Kevin Feige, is you always want to keep the core fans in mind because they have been the ones that have been keeping the torch lit for many, many years. But these are also stories for young people and for new audiences. These are myths, and so you always want to have an outstretched hand to people who might not have that background. And so you're really telling two stories at once. You're telling the story for the people who are fresh eyes, and you're telling the story for the people who have been there with the property and with the stories and the characters for so many years, and make sure that you're honoring them as well." And honestly here, it's almost a little strange these are remarks he felt he had to make, or are something worth talking about now, because I dare say it should be obvious that the goal of any story being told in a pre-existing universe like Star Wars, one that already has a well-established fanbase, is to both satisfy those existing fans while hopefully attracting new people to the property who will then become fans themselves. That's basically how every single business works or should work. You strive to keep your current customer base happy while trying to bring in new ones in the process. And I always kind of chuckle or roll my eyes when I hear Star Wars fans being accused of being too picky or difficult, if not impossible to please, like that's a bad thing or some sort of insult. Like it's unheard of or ridiculous to expect to get a quality product when you pay for something. Like, instead, you should just shut up and be grateful they're giving you anything at all. And I've literally been told that by fellow Star Wars fans. Be grateful you get Star Wars at all. Even though they're not giving you anything, they're again expecting you to pay for it or to buy it. And they're making a heck of a lot of money in the process off of all of us who consume it. But for whatever reason, when it comes to movies or stories, especially Star Wars for some reason, it's considered by some unreasonable or wrong to demand quality or to be upset and complain when you feel like you didn't get it. I mean, imagine if we had a similar attitude with other forms of business. Imagine if you took your car to get your brakes done and while you were on your way home, they failed and you ended up crashing. And when you complained, you were told you're too difficult to please and that you should be grateful they worked on your car at all. And yeah, that's a pretty extreme example, or you could say it's apples to oranges, but I do think it tends to highlight how strange it is to be told that it's not okay to be picky or disappointed when you pay for something and don't get it. And sure, art is, by and large, subjective, and what one person doesn't like may be loved by someone else, which is fine. But when a sizable percentage of your fanbase says something isn't good, and the response is they're just being picky or it's impossible to please them, and yet shortly after that, a series comes out that, again, is almost universally loved, talking about The Mandalorian, that narrative quickly falls apart, and it becomes clear that the real problem was likely with the approach of the previous projects. And though I don't want to in any way misconstrue Favreau's words here or why he said them, the fact that he's talking about what he learned elsewhere and then applied here with The Mandalorian and in Star Wars does seem rather telling. It tends to imply this was an attitude shift, where he brought in a different mindset or approach, when compared to the attitude that had been at Lucasfilm and with other Star Wars projects that maybe didn't think so much about the older core fans. And look, I do want to make it clear I fully understand Disney and Lucasfilm's desire to try and create new fans or to bring in the younger, current generation. I certainly do not blame them for trying to do that. Hell, they'd be idiots if they didn't try to capture the hearts and minds of the young. That's exactly what happened with most of the current adult fans. We saw it when we were kids, loved it, and have continued to love it and consume it our whole lives. And no, in their defense, it's certainly not easy to please a multi-generational fan base, but with the right approach, it's certainly not impossible. The Mandalorian proves that. And what I think the secret to its success just might be is that it feels very organic and real within the context of Star Wars, of course, meaning an attempt was made to honor and create actual Star Wars, not just something that looked like it or felt like it or mimicked it. It went back to the original inspiration for it and built from there, incorporating elements in a very natural way from other sources of the canon. And though you're certainly free to completely disagree with me, one of the big things that draws me into The Mandalorian is that I believe this is happening in the same universe as those original 6 movies. Again, there's an organic feeling to it that's very hard to articulate or explain exactly. When I watched The Mandalorian, I'm watching Star Wars. Whereas, for whatever reason, the sequels felt separate from what came before or separate from the overall story. There was something authentic that was missing from them, even though The Mandalorian uses all original characters and a new concept for a story within Star Wars, and the sequels actually used a lot of pre-existing characters and technically are supposed to carry on the same story from before. Yet one still felt like actual Star Wars, while the other felt like an attempt to create Star Wars, if that makes sense. And really, I think after The Force Awakens, where the biggest complaint was it wasn't original and relied too heavily on nostalgia, Disney and Lucasfilm sort of panicked and thought there was something wrong with the formula now, that people wanted something new and different from Star Wars, that it needed to evolve. Which wasn't entirely wrong. Yes, fans wanted new and different, they didn't want the exact same story again, but there was nothing wrong with the base formula itself, nothing at all. In fact, if you watch the behind-the-scenes series on The Mandalorian, you'll hear how what they did with that show was go back to the same inspirations George Lucas once drew upon. Which again is why I think it feels more like authentic Star Wars. It wasn't just looking at Star Wars itself and trying to duplicate that or do something new with that. It was going back to what made Star Wars great in the first place and tried to tell a new story or come up with a new idea from there. All the while pulling from, again in a more organic or natural way, some of the existing lore and history of Star Wars. It walks that fine line perfectly of being something new and different that feels original in many ways, yet not only pays homage to what came before, but fits in and feels like a part of the stories already told. Anyway, here, I do love this comment from Jon Favreau, even though, no, it really shouldn't even need to be said. Because, yeah, of course you want to try to bring in new fans, and you have to make sure a story can be understood by someone completely new to the franchise. You don't want to turn them off immediately by making things too reliant on the lore, but you also cannot ignore the existing fans in the process, ignore what your existing customers want and are paying for. And like it or not, agree with it or not, you have to some extent, make these stories for the fans. And if you're a creator who doesn't like that idea or finds no joy in catering to some degree to a fan base that prefers having complete artistic freedom in order to do whatever you want with a story, then go and do that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all, wanting to tell your own completely original stories. And that's not to say that Star Wars should turn into the fan service show. It's not to say you can't take risks with the story or subvert expectations from time to time. I'm only saying that if whoever is creating it, the writer and or director of a movie, let's say, if they have no real interest in making the film for the fans at all, if they're only interested in making their own movie with no regards to how it will be received by that fan base, then they're not the right choice for the job. And the fact that Jon Favreau approached The Mandalorian with the idea to try and cater to the fans, and then almost all fans loved it, it tends to say not only is his approach the right one, but that he himself is the right man for the job. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about all this, or about Favreau's comments. Should fans be taken into consideration when making these movies or shows? And if so, how much? Or is that just not the way at all? Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.